Okay, Joe, you did something last episode that made me very nervous. We got to find out what is the book that you are going to be picking next.
See, you got kind of nervous about this and got kind of worried. And I sensed that, but I felt like it would be just fine. But we did have a winner, and they picked a really good one too, Mike. So the problem with this going so well is it makes me want to do it again.
Oh, boy.
So I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I feel like this should become a game in some form. I need to figure that out. But
for those who didn't attend the live recording, here's how this went. Joe sprung it on me live, and I basically was like, absolutely not. I hold veto power, yada, yada, yada. And then I edited it all down, and if you listen to the downloaded version, none of that was in there. So basically, you were left with the impression that whatever was going to be picked was going to be the book that we were going to be covering, or you were going to be picking next.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way I wanted to leave it, as an experiment. And this one was successful. So I guess, that maybe proves your point that it kind of works. But also, I was kind of, I guess, in the back of my mind, hoping that this would be a disaster and we wouldn't have to do it again. Just being honest.
That's a fair assessment. But this one went really well. We do have a winner. It was Awful Otter chose The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. Now, that means, so today we have our book, and then my next choice I'll talk about later, but it'll be the one following that on my end. So today, my next choice, Mike's choice, and then The Infinite Game will come at that point. So that would be episode, 81, 82, it'd be episode 83. Is what that'll be. The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. So well done, Awful Otter. Congratulations.
Well done, I guess. Thanks for reinforcing Joe's habit of springing stuff on me as we record live.
I like springing things on Mike, and I don't know why. I'm sorry, sir.
You like to see me freak out, probably.
I feel like I get better, genuine reactions out of you if I spring it to you live while we're recording.
That is probably true. So we are going to be doing The Infinite Game, which is cool because I saw that Simon Sinek had a new book out, and I was kind of in the back of my mind hoping that one would come across the club and people would vote for it, which is how I typically pick the books that we're going to be covering. So this one I'm excited to read. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek's. We've covered Start With Why before, but I've read Leaders Eat Last too, and I was a big fan of that book. So anxious to dive into this one.
I own the book Leaders Eat Last, and I ran across it at a thrift store. I don't know why I love hunting books at thrift stores. It's like a thing I do. And I was rummaging through them, and I ran across Leaders Eat Last. And it occurred to me, this is kind of in a weird spot. And I look up, and I'm in like the cookbooks area. It's like someone had stuck Leaders Eat Last in the cooking section. So fun times. But I have done, I sent out, we've talked about my email newsletter a few times here on the show, but I sent one out here a couple days ago about a new project that I have undertaken and that a few people are pretty excited about. It's going to actually come out very quickly. I think it'll be out, let's see, when does this release? It'll be on Friday. It'll be about 5 days or so after this episode releases that this will be live, but I'm revamping and redoing Working with OmniFocus. This is my third time revamping this, so it works out well. It's like Working with OmniFocus 3, and we're on OmniFocus 3. Like, this works great. So I'm in the middle of all of my outlining and planning and script writing and such for all of that, and have been doing a little bit of recording. I know my speed with that sort of thing, so I know I should be in pretty good shape to get that done and released. I think it's November 20th is the release date for that. So I'm pretty excited about this one, Mike. It's been a while since I've gotten into the whole screencasting thing and released something in that space. So I'm excited to get back into it.
It has been a while. And I'm curious, once you start doing it again, if you have like a big learning curve or if it's like riding a bike and you just pick up where you left off. Because
I'm really hoping for the latter of those two.
Well, ScreenFlow is basically the same, but
yeah, and I'm still on the old version of it. So
yeah, it's been a while since I've seen a Joe Bulig screencast. So
I can't say I am at Screencasts Online quality, but one of the things I wanted to put out about that is I have been, like, I'm not a huge mind mapper, but I have been, for this particular course, I've been doing a lot of mind mapping in MindNode, and like, just because like I know you use it all the time, and of course the members of the show get access to your MindNode files, and I was building out my outline for this when you texted me your fun news with MindNode, which I did not know was possible. How did you do this?
Yeah, so I texted Joe, and I didn't let you know as it was happening, but I sent the final version, and then I put in the details. I let you know that I thought I broke MindNode, which is true. I thought I did, because one of these nights this week, as I was finishing today's book, which is 540 something pages, I went to open my MindNode application on my iPhone, where I always take notes when I'm reading books. And when I opened it, I usually leave the MindNode file that I'm working on as the open document. When it went to the MindNode application, I got a pop-up message that said that the file was corrupted. The only thing I could do was tap OK, and then the file was immediately deleted from iCloud. So I couldn't find it on any of my devices. And I was at page like 480 something at the time. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I just lost the entire MindNode file for principles. Because my approach to this, well, I've shared before that typically when I read a book, I'm just jotting down the things that stand out to me. This book is a little bit different. This is a summary of like everything Ray Dalio has ever learned. And he's got a handy reference in the middle of the physical book that I wanted to kind of recreate as a digital version that I could search, because I think that this is something I'm going to want to go back and reference down the road. And so I set about to do that. And this file, the MindNode file, which includes mainly text, a few images, as there's different diagrams and things, and I would snap a photo on my phone and embed it in the MindNode file. But this MindNode file alone is 168 megabytes. So I thought to myself, well, this thing just got so big that MindNode can't handle it, and it just freaked out when it tried to open the file. What actually happened, I think, is that iCloud is being iCloud, and there are issues with iCloud. People share stories all the time about, oh, my shortcuts disappeared or whatever. Like, there's weird stuff that's going on with iCloud right now. And I think that iCloud did something while it was syncing with that package file that it just didn't. It was an Apple thing. It was not a MindNode thing. I was able to go into iCloud.com on my computer and go restore the file. And then once I opened it again, I've had no issues since then. But it's gotten me a little bit nervous about things. At least I know now that I can go back and find them, because when I opened it up, I drilled down into the settings in my iOS devices. You can't find it that way. The only way I could find the file was going into iCloud.com, and then you can see a list of the files that you've recently deleted, and you can download one to your computer. That's what I did. Then I moved it back into iCloud, and it seems to be working. But for a moment there, it was a little bit scary, and I legitimately thought that I had hit the the limit for what MindNode can handle in terms of size. If you see this thing, you'll understand why I thought that.
Yeah. I would say we were talking about this a little bit before we jumped on, and I pulled up Mike's file for this particular book. It's intense. Like, there is a ton of information about this book in that MindNode file. So I'm gonna have to spend some time with this, Mike, and I read the book. Like, this is nuts. So yeah, well done.
Well, like I said, this is not my standard approach. I'm not trying to recreate the book 99.9% of the time when I read it. But I saw when I looked at the physical copy of the book that there's this special section in the middle that's easy to find, and then it's got 2 different bookmarks for the different sections, which we'll get into in a minute here. I just thought to myself that, this is intended to be a reference book. I should make a digital version of this. Can I do that with a MindNode? It might be a lot of work. Nah, it won't be that bad. It was that bad. It was a ton of work. But I'm glad I got it done now. And it's searchable, so that's cool.
Hey, there's that. I just took pictures of the references in the middle.
I could have done that probably, but
take pictures, OCR it, and call it good.
I'm a nerd, so. And like you mentioned, I upload my mind map files to the club. So if you are a premium member and you're giving us a couple bucks a month, first of all, thank you so much for your support. But also go check out the book notes section because that's where all of these things live.
There's a lot in there.
There is. I try to upload them all for every book that we read. I include my gap books when I do my notes for them also. And they're all PDF files, so you can download those, and they're not super huge. The PDF for this one, I think, is like 5 megabytes. All right. So should we talk about today's book?
Yes. This will be a fun one.
This is a big one. It should be a ton of fun. This is Principles by Ray Dalio. I know you had picked this as a gap book, and you had it as a gap book for a couple different episodes. At the time, I just thought, honestly, you were being slow in reading it. Now that I have it, I understand. It's 540-something pages.
Yes.
So it is a very large book. It is a good book, and it's an interesting read because a lot of the books that are in like the personal development or the business type space, the productivity type books, they tend to be, here's a system, follow this, you'll get awesome results. This is kind of the opposite, where it's like, here's my story, everything that I've learned, try to apply the stuff that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it really inspired me, like seeing this and reading this book. I was thinking to myself, man, it would be kind of cool to create something like this as a legacy to leave, not just my kids, but anybody who would be interested in that sort of thing. Now, Ray Dalio has been fairly successful, so people want to know what he did.
Fairly?
I don't think this is something that you could justify just anybody doing, but I also, like, that's where my brain went, is that would be kind of cool, if everybody at the end of their life had to think through, not that Ray's at the end of his life, but, they think through all of the things that they've learned and they actually write them down. They document them. That's kind of cool. And I got thinking to myself, if there was a thing like this that existed for all of the things that I value and all the principles that govern my life, that would be awesome. We've got our Schmitz Family Core Values, which is kind of like a step in this direction, but this is obviously a lot deeper than that, given how long it is.
Yeah, this is one that, like, it's in 3 parts, and it's borderline 3 books in one. Like, it's darn close because it's so long. And just to kind of summarize, like, what those parts are, the first one is essentially an autobiography of Bridgewater by Ray Dalio. Bridgewater being the investment firm that he founded and runs. So that's part 1. Part 2 is life principles, the principles that he developed as part of building Bridgewater, just to live a genuine life. And then he goes into part 3, which is the work principles. So he's then taking that same concept and applying it to business and such. So it's a fascinating read, but at the same time, like, there is a ton here. I have a single action item off of this book, which we'll get to later, that is actually like a massive project. So you can't really, and you have some here too. Like, you can get individual action items out of this particular book, but it's more like an inspirational, motivational type book, I think. Yes, you can act on it and you can build out your own set of principles, but to me, the core helpfulness from this particular one is pure motivation and like, be true to yourself and get stuff done. Like, that's the sort of read that I feel that this is. So I really enjoyed it. Ray does a great job writing it, which is kind of unique given I don't think he's done any writing prior to this.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
From what I can tell. He does a lot of writing, of course, internally for his business, but I don't think he's done any public writing previous to this. But no, it's a great read. I'm glad you picked it. It's a fun one. And it's especially interesting to go through a second time.
Yeah. What was the main difference for you going through it a second time as opposed to the first time? Just from a high level, your thoughts and feelings on the book in general, did they change at all? I
can't say that they did, to be completely honest and upfront. it was kind of hard to reread part one.
Sure.
Like that particular one. I mean, yes, it's super engaging and because it's all story, but when you know the story and you know the outcomes and you know the punchlines, it's not as interesting the second time around. So I'll be honest, I kind of skimmed over some of those pieces in the first one. I'm not going to discount the book as a result of that, just because I know my impressions from it the first time I went through it. So I'm going to be gauging it based on that. Part 2 and 3, like getting into the principles themselves, to me it was very refreshing because I know what's coming and I know the rationale behind each point. And yet it's just so dense with material on those two parts that it's hard to come away from it feeling like you just reread a book. It feels very much a new read, even though I've been through it before. So I can't say that there was anything different, just that it rekindles what I originally went through because there's so much there. So
sure,
it's one that I feel like if you have read this, it's worth reading it again. If I were to come back and try to do this a third time, I might skip part 1 the third time around and just go to part 2 and part 3, because I feel like that's where the true reference material level hits.
Okay.
And that's the part I find is super valuable for the long term.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the reason that I ask is that the book is laid out in a very strategic order. So if you know what's coming, I'm sure that changes how you are reading the different sections.
Right.
So it starts with part 1 is called Where I'm Coming From, and this is kind of his story. That's where we'll start. We'll unpack that in a minute, but just real briefly, kind of the outline of the entire book. Part 2 is the life principles, and then part 3, which is the bulk of the book, is the work principles. And those are the principles that they use at Bridgewater. So part 1, his story, I like this part because he's sharing not just the things that he did well to bring credibility, but he's also sharing all the stupid mistakes and how arrogant he was.
Yes.
Because he shares how he was an economist, maybe is the right term, where he was trying to predict things, and he was right at the beginning, and he thought that, okay, I understand this stuff, and I'm an expert. And so the next time he saw something and he thought that it was going to play out a certain way, he went on national TV and he's like, yeah, this is the way it's going to go. And it didn't go that way. And then he realized that everything that he had worked for, he kind of chucked out the window because he had picked that hill to die on, and it didn't pan out the way that he thought it was going to pan out. And then he starts doing some soul searching, like, well, why did it go that way? Why was I wrong? And that kind of sparks this thing in him where he has this new perspective, he says in chapter 3, where he just wants to be right. And he doesn't care if the right answer comes from him. And that is a theme that pops up through the rest of the book in both the life principles and the work principles, which is an interesting perspective. I think you can identify for yourself whether you work in an organization which has a leader maybe above you, or you have worked in an organization where they've either exhibited those skills or not exhibited those skills, or that perspective. And I found through going through this that it actually caused me to get a little bit emotional, both grateful for some of these things that I've kind of understood prior to him defining them here, but he's saying, like, this is how I've done this and been successful in this particular area, whether it's life or work, and the principles that are driving it. And I saw a lot of overlap with some things that personally I believe, but haven't been able to articulate exactly why. I'm like, I know this is right, but I can't explain it. I know I like this and I don't like that, but I can't tell you exactly why.
Sure.
And as I was going through this, I realized that my intuition in some areas has been correct. And then he kind of painted a picture of like why it is that way. And it made me both kind of frustrated for some things that I probably stuck with maybe a little bit too long in the past. And I was like, man, that was difficult. It didn't really need to be that way. And now I can see all the underlying causes which cause it to be difficult. And I just don't want to be associated with that anymore. But then also it caused some gratitude for current situation and the qualities that I see in some of the people that are above me right now, and just thankful for the situation that I have. I'm curious if you had a similar sort of reaction either the first or second time that you went through this, or if it's just me being weird that it hit me so hard with his personal story.
Yeah, I mean, so the first time I came through it, I have a handful of notes from the first time I went through this in a notebook, and I pulled all those out, and some of it struck me the same in that, like, I know that I have a tendency to trust my intuition on a lot of things. I just do, to a fault, in a number of areas. When it comes to certain business decisions, or if it comes to, like, should I write this article or that article, I have a tendency to just trust my gut, and a lot of times it means that I'm spending too much time on things I shouldn't be. And it's because I don't have a good sense of what happens when I do X, does it lead to Y and Z? My assumption is it leads to F or G. And I'm completely wrong on things quite a bit. So going through it the second time, I realized that at a deeper level than I did the first time, I believe. And I'm not real sure the details on how that will play out over time, but I do know that it makes me want more gut checks in place. It wants me to have more systems in place that I can rely on, that keep me from trusting my intuition when a lot of cases I probably shouldn't be doing that. You know, it can cause some problems.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of his whole ethos here, right? With principles, is that you have to understand the truth, and then you have to have the principles that are going to govern your decisions, and those will apply to both your life and your work, but you really need to articulate them because they are going to be the driver for everything positive or negative that happens to you.
Right.
And it takes some time to figure that stuff out. I mean, if you look at the mind map for this was not written in a couple of months. This is a mammoth tome. And to be honest, it could have been a lot longer.
Right.
Because he goes through basically everything that he considers to be true and provides very short descriptions of why he thinks it's so. It's very quick hitting, and it's lots of these little digestible chunks, but there's some principles that he talks about that we've read whole books on. And he just keeps it real short and like, no, these are the things that apply to me. And I think that does a couple of things. One, it gives some credibility to the principle because he's Ray Dalio and he's successful. But also it kind of keeps the door open to define them for yourself, which is kind of interesting. It's almost the opposite effect where it's like, well, this is true for me. It may not be true for you. And there were some things as I went through here where I was like, I don't know if I'm going to apply that one.
Yeah.
But I guess, we're kind of wandering a little bit here. Coming back to part one, where I'm coming from, I'll just try to summarize this real quickly because part two and part three, that's really where the meat is here anyways. As I shared, he talks about the things that he was successful in and also the things that he messed up in. He talks about the 3 different stages of life. I really like this, where the first one is we're dependent on others and we learn. The second one is that others depend on us and we work. And the third one is when others are no longer depend on us and we no longer have to work, we're free to savor life. And I think this is probably where he is, but also how you savor life is open to interpretation. Everybody's got their own version of that. And just the fact that he put this together, this is a lot of work. And I feel like the fact that he's sharing all of this, everything that he's learned essentially, he has a little bit of a perspective of I want to help others get to the level where I've been. I don't want them to continue to banging their head against the wall and to make things harder than they have to be. If you can learn from my mistakes, go ahead and do it, sort of a thing, right? Otherwise, he wouldn't, I don't think, be... there's no reason to share all the mistakes that he made, which he shares a ton. Most of the time when he talks about the the good stuff that happens, by the way. When he gets into like the work principles, it's these people did this and it was the right thing to do. But then all the negative stuff, it's like, I needed to realize that I wasn't good at this, that, and the other thing, which is a very effective perspective. But this whole part one, this is really the foundation which makes him believable in the second and third parts. I don't think just picking up and reading part 2 or part 3, I would have been as interested in what he had to say had I not read this first section.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that second time through, part 2 and part 3 had a larger impact, because once you go through part 1 and you understand who Ray Dalio is, and like I've kept up with some of the investment world over time, so like I knew who Ray was before I picked this up the first time, but I didn't understand Bridgewater near as well as I did when I finished reading it the first time, and especially the second time. But the gap between those two, I've noticed and paid attention to Bridgewater more because I'm aware of them even more now. And I'm fascinated by the way that they work in today's world. So part 2 and part 3 have, to your point, they have a bigger impact once you understand the company, Ray, and where they've been.
Exactly. So let's jump into part 2 here, life principles. And let me explain how this is kind of put together. So there's each of these different sections, and then there are chapters inside of these sections. Although in part 1, for example, there are 8 different chapters. And then when you get to life principles, he's really just numbering the principles. So it starts over at 1. And there are 5 here in the life principles section. We're not going to go through all of these. There's no way we could do that and make this episode interesting for people. So we're going to pick and choose the ones that really kind of jump out to us, but I'll real quickly just cover the 5 that are in here. Number 1 is embrace reality and deal with it. Number 2 is use the 5-step process to get what you want out of life. Number 3 is be radically open-minded. Number 4 is understand that people are wired very differently. And number 5, learn how to make decisions effectively. So the things that I really liked here, not necessarily the 5-step process, that felt like a system. I 100% believe that, he, through trial and error, landed on this, and this absolutely works for him. Reading through that does feel a little bit weird in terms of, okay, I'm going to try to apply this myself. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the 5-step process is interesting. It's not one that I think basically set goals and go after them if you want that.
Yeah. So I guess real quickly, first is have clear goals. Second is identify and don't tolerate problems. Third is diagnose problems to get to their root causes. 4 is design a plan. 5, push through to completion. And there's this little graphic, goals, problems, diagnosis, design, doing, and it's like this little loop-de-loop sort of a thing. I think the visual is communicating is that you're going to set goals, you're going to encounter obstacles, you're going to have to figure out a way around them, and then eventually, if you take that approach, you're going to keep moving upward. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're building out or living life, like you always have downturns to some degree, and generally speaking, he's talking about set goals, go for them. You're inevitably going to have something that goes wrong or something that has a downturn. Evaluate it, figure out how to get past it, and push through. That way you can keep moving forward. Like that concept it's very systematic, but that's Ray Dalio. Like that is the way that he does life, and he does everything in this book that way. It's all, the whole point behind the principles is to give him guidance in making decisions every day.
Yep.
So with all of like the 5 steps, or each individual piece being open-minded, radical transparency and radical truth, like these are things that he's all for because he wants to get the raw facts, make decisions based on those raw facts that are consistent and repeatable, so that he can alleviate the pressure on his own mind and his own intuition to enjoy life. Like that's really what he's going for, is success through systematized, repeatable decision making. And that's not a simple process to come to. I mean, when you look through each of these principles and what he has written here, yes, they're amazing principles, most of them. Like almost all of them I agree with. But if you think about the mass number of, guiding steps here, it's kind of hard to get your head around how you could use all of this to make decisions each day. I mean, it's incredibly valuable, but there's well over I think there's probably about 1,000 or maybe more principles at a small scale in this book.
Probably, yeah. I haven't counted them all.
Yeah, and if you think about trying to just be aware of that many guiding principles in making decisions, like that's borderline impossible.
Yep.
So, like the practicality of using this as a system, I feel is very difficult. But having gone through the process to write and expand on these principles, I feel like would cement them in your brain and in your organization quite a bit more than just taking what he has and trying to implement it. So I think it's incredibly valuable. I just think it's kind of hard to get your head around, which is why you kind of have to go through the process of doing this on your own.
Yeah, it is hard to wrap your head around. The 5-step process makes it seem just like every other system that we've talked about on Bookworm, but it's really kind of vague and general because the specifics of your situation are going to be different, and you have to figure out for yourself in those different areas really what's true. If I were to summarize this section, I think there's a couple key things. First, he mentions the very first principle he talks about is be a hyper-realist. He even mentions that people who create great things aren't ideal dreamers. They're totally grounded in reality. So you have to know what is true in order to connect the things around you in the ideal way. And he really believes in this idea of evolution, not like a large macro as a species topic, but just personal evolution where you encounter something, you're able to learn from it, you're able to get better, get stronger, become a better version of yourself, and you just keep doing that over and over and over again throughout your entire life. And I think that is a very important perspective to have. I think that's a mindset shift that nearly anybody could benefit from, going back to the book on mindset that we covered by Carol Dweck. I mean, it's really the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. This is just growth mindset to the nth degree, in my opinion.
For sure, yeah.
Because it's not just how am I going to learn from whatever happens to me, but I want to realize as much as I can the ultimate truth of the situation around me. And then once I am enlightened to the degree where I understand what's true, then I kind of will know what to do. I'm not sure if that is simpler or more complicated than the 5-step process. It feels a little bit more simple to me. I think there's just a couple pieces there, and it's not these things that you follow in order. They're more, again, principles. They're kind of like the foundational guardrails behind your approach to everything. It doesn't really matter. You're not going to find yourself at stage 4 in the 5-step process. You're going to just continue to approach things with an open mind, which is something that we'll talk about here in a little bit.
Right.
And then you're going to constantly be asking, how can I do better next time?
Yeah, absolutely. You got 3 specific pieces here you want to go through. You want to start with the first one?
Sure. So there's a section here where he talks about disagreements, which I thought was interesting because most people view disagreements as people are fighting about something and someone has to win, someone has to lose. And the usual perspective when you have a disagreement, I think, is I want to prove that I know better than you do. But he kind of talks about disagreements in a different light. He mentions that disagreements aren't threats as much as they are opportunities for learning. So don't be afraid to disagree, because the fact that you are disagreeing may show you that somebody else has another aspect of truth that you haven't realized yet. And I think back to most of the disagreements that I've had And I know it's a general statement, but I think it's totally fair to say that. And it's hard in the moment to have that correct perspective. So this isn't necessarily an action item for me, but I want to recognize that the fact that I am in a disagreement is actually an opportunity to learn. It's not something that is hindering me from making progress. And the fact that we're here isn't necessarily a bad thing. Just shut up and figure out what you can learn from it so that you can get better instead of trying to impose your will and dominate the other party, whether that's my wife, a coworker, my boss, anybody, because I think this applies both up and down the chain of command, to borrow the term from extreme ownership, like people who are above you, people are below you. So I might get in a disagreement with my dad. I might get in a disagreement with my kids. Okay. Same principle applies here. Don't try to justify myself. Try to understand things from their perspective, right?
Right.
And then figure out where I might be wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I know that whenever we get into disagreements, it's easy to get into defensive mode and start explaining your own side of the story right away. When in most cases, you're just flipping the coin to your own side as opposed to trying to understand the other side. So I can't say that I'm good at this, but this is a piece that stood out to me the first time I went through it, because I've tried to learn since then how to ask questions when I'm in the middle of a disagreement, because essentially what that does is it takes the burden of explaining a point of view off of me and puts it on the other person. And burden's maybe the wrong word there, because I don't want it to be a bad thing. It's just that asking that other person what they think about their point of view, or how they came to that, or tell me more about this specific piece. All of those questions can eventually lead to a deeper conversation. And I think that in the midst of that deeper conversation, that's when you can start to understand why you're disagreeing and why there's a difference between the two of you, because you may get to a point where you understand that the foundation of how that other person came to believe what they think is drastically different than the foundation that you stand on. So yes, there's a disagreement there, but asking the questions as opposed to defending your own, at least in my opinion, can drive a better, I don't want to say argument, but a debate, maybe.
More productive argument, maybe.
Yeah, or maybe productive discourse. It
Sure.
changes from, I don't want to say hate-filled, but a heated conversation to genuine back and forth about a given topic. That's kind of where I come from on that. But that originally, I hadn't really come to that conclusion until I read this the first time through. So it's interesting to me that you pulled this out, stuck it in the outline, because this was a piece that truly struck me heavily the first time I went through this. And reading it again the second time, I was like, yep, absolutely. I still stink at that, but I will continue to agree that, yes, that is a thing I should be doing.
Sure. And the thing that's tied to this, I think, is the whole section, principle number 3, be radically open-minded. I think if you are open-minded, that's the key to whether you can embrace a disagreement through the right lens and turn it into a positive instead of it being a negative. He talks through the different characteristics of being closed-minded versus open-minded. And this, again, sounds a lot like fixed mindset versus growth mindset, but closed-minded, you don't want your ideas challenged. You're more likely to make statements and ask questions, focus more on being understood than on understanding others. All of this is stuff we've heard before, right? So Stephen Covey is the one who said, seek first to understand, then to be understood, right? Where he talked about Mindset by Carol Dweck. Say things like, I could be wrong, but here's my opinion. Closed-minded people block others from speaking. They have trouble holding two thoughts simultaneously in their minds. They lack a deep sense of humility. When you compare that to somebody who's open-minded, they're more curious about why there's a disagreement. They genuinely believe they could be wrong. The questions that they ask are genuine. They always feel compelled to see things through other people's eyes. They know when to make statements and when to ask questions. They're more interested in listening than speaking. they can hold two or more conflicting concepts in their mind. They go back and forth between them to assess the relative merits. They're able to compare things. They're not just so fixated on, this is the thing that I believe before we started talking, so this has to be true and I'm going to yell louder, right? They approach everything with a deep-seated fear that they could be wrong. And I don't think fear maybe is the right word there. Curiosity maybe is a better one, where you want to discover the things that are true. That's something that I try to embody in my own life, but I know that I could be better at. So I want to become better at being open-minded. And I think that the place that plays out most often and most practically in my day-to-day life is in the disagreements that pop up. That's kind of the acid test for me, is next time I'm in a disagreement, how do I find myself responding? If I'm going to take my emotional temperature in the moment, am I cool, calm, and collected and trying to figure out where I missed it? Or am I frustrated and angry and feel my blood boiling because the other person just doesn't get it, And I'm ashamed to admit that one happens a little more often than I'd like.
Sure. Yeah, I specifically noticed this one in my marriage. My wife and I can't say we have a lot of fights. We have some heated debates, probably regularly, but I can't say it's a full-blown fight most of the time. Most cases, I find that those heated conversations and the fights come from me not being willing to see her side of the story, and essentially not being open-minded to her side of the conversation. It's not a good place to be in 99.9% of cases. I can say that in recent months, over the last year, I've specifically been targeting that thought process because I know it's not helpful. And going through the process of trying to understand what Ray's take is on being open-minded and such, just kind of rekindled that, Mike. And it's been one that I've had conversations with my wife about it, in that I'm trying to just be willing to admit that I'm wrong. Like I have to be okay with that. And there's a lot of cases where she'd say the same thing, but it's a back and forth, obviously, in a marriage, trying to understand each other, but you always have to be open-minded to the other person's point of view. And if you're not, you're going to have disagreements that you don't resolve, or that you don't come to an agreement to disagree on. So I appreciated this, and I can't say that it's one that's super groundbreaking right now, but it's one that was at least encouragement. This is why I say it's a motivational type book occasionally. That was another motivator and another kickstart in the right direction for sure. Yeah.
And the question then, if you decide that you want to be open-minded, is how do you become open-minded? And he has a section on that. A lot of this stuff is just general, recognize what's going on here, stuff like use pain as your guide towards quality reflection, make being open-minded a habit, get to know your blind spots. If there's a number of believable people who say you're doing something wrong, you're the only one who doesn't see it that way, assume you're probably biased. But the one that was interesting to me, and this is one of my action items, is to meditate. And
good job, Mike. Proud of you.
Yeah. So I've mentioned this a couple different times, I think, now that I've been working on this article for the Sweet Setup. By the time that this goes live, that article will be published on the best mindfulness meditation app. So this has kind of been culminating and coming to a head, but the reminder that they gave me here in Principles, this is the thing that I think finally has cemented this and is going to make this a habit. I've been doing Headspace now. My current streak is 12 days in a row.
Okay.
And it seems to be working. The thing that has kind of flipped the trigger for this, in my opinion, is, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but I feel like this might help people who maybe struggle with this, like me, where I've always thought, my situation isn't that bad compared to other people. I'm not in an office environment and people are barging in all the time and giving me a bunch of things to do. So meditation is probably great for those types of people who just can't handle the situation they find themselves in, but I shouldn't need that. I think ultimately that's kind of my hesitancy to the idea of mindfulness meditation, because I understand the science behind it. I also, a long time ago, got over the whole woo-woo or spiritual aspect of it. There are different meditation styles and practices that get into that stuff, and those I'm not interested in at all. But mindfulness meditation, I definitely am. I want to train my brain to focus and to regulate my emotions and things like that, all the physiological benefits that come from it. There's nothing spiritual about that. You can apply it spiritually. You know, we talk about our faith on this podcast. Some people say too much, but that's a big part of who I am. So I can apply these principles and think about the people I'm praying for or the verses that I'm reading. But that's not something that, even if you are completely turned off by everything spiritual, there's nothing in just mindfulness meditation that will cause you to do that. It's simply just training your brain on whatever you want to focus it on, and then recognizing when it wanders and bringing it back. The fact that you keep bringing it back, that's the thing that helps it to stay on track more. And I've recognized, I think, that this isn't something that I necessarily need to do, but it is something that will be helpful, and that has turned it into something that I want to do. And especially as he frames it here in principles as being a thing that can help you be open-minded, and recognizing that sometimes you're not so hot at being open-minded. That kind of it highlights the point that, you know, you really could use this.
Sure.
So that's one of my action items.
Well done. I'm proud of you. And I'm sad that 10% Happier didn't make it.
It's a solid app. You'll have to read the review.
Okay.
But
it's expensive. I get it.
It is.
I'm with you on the meditation thing. Obviously, I've kind of switched sides. I struggled with it for a very long time, but I've been noticing a lot more of the benefits. It's kind of this weird chicken and egg thing, because it's like it's almost like you have to be into meditation to understand the benefits of meditation. And when you're not, or you're just trying it out but being skeptical, like you haven't bought into it, so then you're not aware of it. It's so weird. Like it's kind of back and forth, I find. But the more I have dedicated to the practice and making sure that I do that on a daily basis, I've noticed I'm a lot more of a calm person than I used to be. I let things go quicker than I used to, and I don't get as fired up as quickly as I used to. So at this point, I'm pretty much sold.
Yeah, and that's the goal, I think, for me, is when I am in a disagreement and I feel myself getting frustrated, the fight versus flight is kicking in, and it just shows that I haven't yet developed that to the point where I can catch it early enough to control it. And obviously each situation is a little bit different, but that's what I want to get to, is exactly what you just described, where no matter what happens to land in my lap or whatever happens around me, I can respond appropriately and I can see it the right way. And I feel like meditation is something that, mindfulness meditation specifically, is something that can help me get there.
Sure. What else we got on life principles? I got lost on the outline.
Yeah, I kind of jumped over all over the place. But the last thing I wanted to talk about here comes from section 5. He talks about synthesizing as the collecting and interpreting of dots. And this was interesting to me because I've shared on this podcast before, one of the things that allowed me to be creative and consider myself a writer, podcaster, creator, whatever, was reading Austin Kleon's book, Steal Like an Artist. And he talks about how when you create something, you're literally just connecting dots in a way that they haven't been connected before, but the dots themselves are not completely original. So when he's talking about synthesizing in this book, that's a term I thought of. Obviously, he's using this in terms of doing this for making right decisions. But I also thought back to that book by Austin Kleon and how synthesizing can also be used in the creative process. And I thought this was kind of cool. Not just as a validation for something that I've talked about before, but really just highlighting this as a life principle and how this can make you, how this can keep you on the right path. I think the way he presented it in this book made it seem a little bit more approachable for just about everybody. Because with Austin Kleon's book, for example, Steal Like an Artist, people have trouble identifying themselves as a creative person or as an artist. And I talked about that in my MacStock presentation, that really everybody is creative. When you give a kid a box of crayons, they don't sit there and say, well, where are the instructions? What am I supposed to do? They just start drawing, unless they've had some prior coaching one way or the other. But by default, we're naturally kind of curious and we want to experiment with things. So synthesizing the situation at hand, synthesizing the situation through time, these are all different things that he talks about in terms of making good decisions. And I think that when you view collecting these dots and interpreting these dots and trying out all these different things, it's kind of a license to be more creative. And creative is probably not the right term. Maybe it's more adventurous. I don't know. But I guess the takeaway for me as I read this was don't put yourself in this box because of the things that you have traditionally done, or maybe you tried something a long time ago and it didn't go exactly the way you wanted it to, so you're afraid to even try it again. This is part of making good decisions, is trying things and failing at them. The key, though, is to recognize the truth, right? To see why things failed or why you didn't get a good outcome. And you might just surprise yourself at what you're able to find when you view this synthesizing as just collecting as many dots as you can and then figuring out what they actually mean.
Or just letting the connection happen naturally. I mean, we do this all the time with Bookworm, in that we read a ton of books. Sometimes they overlap. A lot of times they're system books, and Mike loves them to death. And sometimes we find things that are just completely contradictory to what we believe. I'm sure Mike's looking at Amanda Palmer right now. So these things happen, and you collect a lot of information about a lot of different areas. And over time, like, you start to put those dots together in ways that are new to you and might be new to the world. And I think a lot of the art side can come out in that, but you have to be willing to make that commitment to connecting, or at least collecting, those dots, whether it's reading a bunch of articles online or experimenting with a guitar or, playing around with screencasts and such. No matter what it is, I mean, playing around with it and learning about it is, like, to your point, something we're naturally inclined to, but it can lead to a lot of really cool things. So yeah, I love Bookworm because it gives me a schedule for collecting dots, and
right.
It's an easy avenue, books are, to gathering a lot of information very quickly. So I'm of course a big fan of the dots being originated in books. Obviously, I'd also like to play around with things as well, both of which do a great job at collecting dots. So thanks, Ray, for encouraging my habits.
Yep. The last thing that I wanted to call out in this section is something that's pretty short. Near the end, he mentions, in order to have the best possible life, you need to, 1, know what the best decisions are, and 2, have the courage to make them. And I feel like this is kind of related to collecting dots, because you can't know what the best decisions are unless you've collected enough dots to weigh them against each other. And then having the courage to make them, that's obviously its own thing. But it's not just stepping out blindly and hoping for the best. It's trying a bunch of things, doing a bunch of tests, basically, and then determining the best course of action. Once you see what the best course of action is, even if it's going to be hard or it's going to be scary, having the ability to overcome the fear and do what you know you need to do, that's the thing that's going to get you ultimately to a fulfilling life.
Ready for work principles?
Yeah, let's talk about work principles.
Last section in this one.
Yep. Now, there is a ton here. Number 1, trust in radical truth and radical transparency. Number 2, cultivate meaningful work and meaningful relationships. Number 3, create a culture in which it's okay to make mistakes and unacceptable not to learn from them. Number 4, get and stay in sync. Number 5, believability, weight your decision making. Number 6, recognize how to get beyond disagreements. Number 7, remember that the who is more important than the what. Number 8, hire right, because the penalties for hiring wrong are huge. Number 9, constantly train, test, evaluate, and sort people. Let's see. Number 10, manage as someone operating a machine to achieve a goal. Number 11, perceive and don't tolerate problems. Number 12, diagnose problems to get to their root causes. Number 13, design improvements to your machine to get around your problems. Number 14, do what you set out to do. Number 5, use tools and protocols to shape how work is done. Number 16, for heaven's sake, don't overlook governance. I share all of those just to illustrate the point that there is a lot in here that we are not going to talk about. So don't base a judgment on this section based on what you hear us talk about.
Right, because this section, so this is part 3. Part 3 by itself is 259 pages. That's a book by itself.
Yeah, and the thing that is really interesting in this, there's a couple of big themes. That's kind of what I tried to pick out here. Number 1, he talks about this concept of an idea meritocracy. This, I think, is the crux of all of the principles in this section. I really like his definition of an idea meritocracy, which is radical truth plus radical transparency plus believability weighted decision making. I didn't really like the whole believability weighted decision making when it came to the life principles, because there are some things that I haven't understood that I've done anyways, and they've ended up being the right thing to do.
Sure.
But I think it makes sense in a business perspective in a lot of different organizations. Now, there are obviously going to be situations where you are going to you're going to overrule those, I think. I don't think you can get away from that completely. But I do think if the goal is to make yourself replaceable as you create this organization or this business or this thing, you have to have this embedded in the fabric of the organization. So I understand the value of it. But the two things that really stand out to me from this are radical truth and radical transparency.
Well, here, real quick, before you get into that, let's define what the idea meritocracy is. Because I know when I went through this the first time, like, that's a really cool term. What on earth is that? Like, that's kind of a hard one to get your head around. And I think in his case, essentially what they're after is a way to collect ideas from anyone and everyone and weigh them all equally.
Yes.
In some form.
I shared the formula that he shares at the first section of this, where it's about how he thinks about organizations. So there's the 3 different components: radical truth, radical transparency, believability, weighted decision making. What does that look like? I think that's kind of what you're getting at. Radical truth, doesn't matter what your title is. If you are wrong, you are wrong, and anybody can be right. Number 2, radical transparency, everybody can see everything. And then number 3, the things that govern how decisions are made, they're based on logic, basically. The believability weighted decision making, this makes the most sense, so this is the thing that we're going to do. Data-driven decisions might be another way to define that. And so I can't think of any organization that I've worked with that, like, is this based on the definition that he outlines here. And I don't think that they necessarily should be either. But I do think that these 3 ideas that combine the idea of meritocracy, this I can definitely see value in this. I would like to build elements of this into the organizations that I am involved with. The challenge is, how do you do that if you're not the person who is the CEO calling the shots? But I do think that radical truth and radical transparency, specifically, like always seeking the truth and always sharing it, those are things that anybody can apply.
But it requires the people involved to be trustworthy.
Yes.
And full of integrity. And I say that because I've been burnt by this one. Because I the first time I went through this, I embraced this one wholeheartedly and went down the path of radical truth, radical transparency within the business that I was in the middle of at the time. and it bit me hard. So
yeah, you cannot just join an organization and say, I am going to embrace radical truth and radical transparency, because that will have negative ramifications if the people above you do not embrace the same ideals.
Or below you in this case. So,
yep,
I'm not going to go into any details other than that, but it is very easy for people to take advantage of an organization if you embrace this. So the people who are in the organization have to be bought in 100%. If there's any question about, their loyalty or their integrity, like, you have a different issue, which I think is why, like, he's got part 3 broken down into 3 subsections. Like, the first one is getting the culture right, which is where this radical truth and radical transparency piece comes from. And he quickly follows that up with getting the people right.
Right, yep.
And I think that's why. Because if you get the culture right, it has to have the right people in it. And I have screwed that up in the past.
Culture is people.
See, there's that too. He makes them separate, though.
Yep, and I understand it. He's talking about from his perspective as a CEO and growing and scaling this company, right? So he is driving the ship when they're small, and then as they grow, he's having to delegate to other people. And by creating the culture first, he has a better chance of everybody being on board with the vision that he's casting at the very beginning. You cannot just collect a bunch of people and assume that they will create the right culture. You do have to have the direction dictated by the culture first, I think. But the way that it plays out is in the people who are a part of the organization. I mean, there are a lot of organizations that have mission statements that sound great, and then they don't live out any of them. So they might have the right corporate culture on paper, but everybody in the organization knows that's not how they actually do things. And so that's why I say that culture is people, because they're the ones that have to live it out.
Yeah, sure. For sure.
All right. Another thing that, talking about culture, that stood out to me in this section is I put disagree but commit. He has a little bit different way of saying that. Number 6, recognize how to get beyond disagreements. He mentions 6.4. So that's basically how he writes this. Is he's got the principles and then a whole bunch of point principles and then a whole bunch of sub-principles below those, or sub-principles, I guess is how he defines those. But 6.4, once a decision is made, everyone should get behind it, even though individuals may still disagree. This one jumped out to me because I've sort of studied this already, but I think this is the thing that kind of makes this all work. Like, if you embrace all of the principles up until this point, and then you've got a disagreement and you can't get past it, and people stay offended about something that goes a way that's different than they think it should, then ultimately it's going to break. So this is kind of the bottleneck, or the choke point, I realized, is that once you have a decision that's made by the team and you're using the idea of meritocracy, these believability weighted decisions that you're making, you have to be able to disconnect your personal feelings or what side you were on before the decision was made from the actual decision, and then work to see the end goal that the organization has come about. You got to be able to see things from a higher level. The disagree but commit, this is the way that I heard it defined, and I think it was Jeff Bezos who originally I saw talk about this. But I think this is something that is simple maybe to understand, a lot harder to practice.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But something that I think is really, really valuable. And this is something that you could apply as if you're at the head of an organization and you say, I want my people to understand that there's going to be disagreements. So this is a principle we're all going to share in, like, disagree but commit. But I think the more valuable application of it is if you're not at the top of the food chain, recognizing that you're not always going to get your way. If you can start practicing this, it's going to it's going to severely impact the quality of your life. You're not going to get so upset about stuff.
Sure.
Because this can apply at home. I don't always get what I want. I've got a wife and 5 kids who also have things that they want to do and places they have to be. And so I may want to stay home on a Saturday. I'm going to go to soccer practice anyways, right? It could happen in a church organization or where I've got people above me who are going to ask me maybe to do things that I don't really want to do, or I don't think I've got a whole lot of extra time. And yeah, I'd love to do that sort of thing, but I just got to step in and fill a need. And obviously there's a work context here too. But I think even though this is talking about work principles, the interesting thing to me about this is how this can be played out in all of these other arenas.
For sure. Yeah, I can think of all kinds of scenarios where I don't agree with what's being done, but the decision is made. The decision is outside of me. So guess what? We get to commit to following through on it the way it was decided because it's outside of me at this point. So, this happened, at our local church. We had a building project here a few years ago, and there were quite a few folks against it, a number of folks for it. It essentially went through, was passed, and has since been built and paid for and everything. But the group that was against it bought in and was all on board as soon as that decision was made, and we didn't have any issues past that point. So kudos to that particular team for following through on it, but that is not simple. That is a hard thing to come to grips with and to follow through on. So a very, very important principle here in, even if you have a disagreement, follow through on the decision once it's made. I don't know what else to say about it other than that, but it's a hard thing to actually do in real life, for sure.
It's a hard thing to do, but what's crazy about it is, let's just say that you're not the one driving the change, making the decision from the top of the food chain. How quickly you can disagree but commit and get over your own preferences has a direct correlation to how happy you're going to be.
Oh, yeah.
And not only on a personal level, but if you have people who can't get over that, then it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. They will sabotage the situation. Like the building project, for example. If there are enough people in that group who didn't want to go through with it, and they fought tooth and nail after the decision, that's going to end in failure. And then you can look back and you can say, oh, well, I guess I was right. But what does that gain anybody at that point? Yeah. Congratulations, you were right, and you killed the organization because of it.
Good job.
The organization, the mission is greater than the individual. And it's kind of interesting to me that if you can get your eyes off of your own individual stuff, that oftentimes that ends up better for you as the individual. It's kind of contrary to how we're wired to think about others first, but when we do, we end up better because of it. It's a kind of a paradox, I guess, but it's tied to what we talked about in the life principles section, where you have to you have to be open-minded and embrace the idea that you could be wrong. And when you are okay with the fact that you might be wrong, it's a lot simpler to just, oh, well, okay, didn't go my way. Let's do it anyways. And get on board with where everybody is going.
For sure. But you should also keep asking why, Mike.
Yeah. Again, there's so much in here. I tried to just pick out a couple things. But near the back of the book, he has an exercise in Principle 12, I think it was, diagnose problems to get to their root causes, where you use a drill down technique to gain what he defines as an 80-20 understanding of the department or a sub-department that's having problems. But you can apply this in any area of life, I think. And where you list the problems, you identify the root causes, you create a plan, you execute the plan. But when you keep asking why, you eventually get to the root causes. That's really the step 2, the identify the root causes. And he has a visual in the book, an example, I don't have it in front of me, where they keep asking why. It reminded me of the 5 whys exercise that I've heard about before. And it's something that I don't do enough of. I want to, and I don't have an action item associated with this, but to keep drilling down until you get to the truth. And it was a good reminder for me and kind of shocking to me, honestly, how much I get to maybe level 1, level 2, and then I see a justification, something that masquerades as a root cause. And I'm like, oh, I guess that kind of makes sense. And then I just leave it. I don't want to do that. I want to spend enough time with the things to really figure out what's going on.
Sure. Yeah, I don't do this in business stuff enough. I really should be asking why things happen. If you work in the world of an online business, which I, of course, have a full-time job at the church, but I still do my side business stuff online. And with that, I have a tendency to, the first inkling at an understanding of why something happened, I'm like, oh, interesting. Okay, I'm going to run with it that way then. Even without second guessing it, when I should probably, drill deeper and deeper and deeper to figure out what the actual root cause is, because most likely I'm just looking at a symptom of the root cause and saying that that's the real deal. So yes, keep asking why. Does he give I don't remember, does he give a number of times to ask?
I don't think he does, but that's why I wanted to call it out here, because I think as a general rule, you could just say 5 whys, and eventually by the 5th why you're going to get there.
Yeah.
And that's probably not 100% true in all situations, but I think it's a good place to start. And then again, there's a ton of places where this can play out. If your kids are acting out, keep asking why. Eventually you'll figure it out. Or even if you're in a work situation, like I'm kind of doing this right now, we're trying to figure out what our scoreboard looks like and what are the things that really drive the business forward. Well, keep asking why, and eventually you'll land at those. Don't just stop at the first thing that sounds good and be like, okay, let's track this.
Sure.
Because you could track it for a month and then realize that, oh, that was a waste of a month.
Right,
that really isn't driving things forward for the business. So the question why, it forces you to think the right way. A lot of finding the right solutions is simply asking the right questions. And you really can't go wrong when you keep asking why. I'm really inspired by his approach of, I want to know what's true. I want to be humble enough for anybody to tell me and show me where I'm wrong. And he's got some examples in this work section of letters that his subordinates sent him and hey, you really did a poor job in this meeting because you did this, that, and the other thing. You didn't let me talk, and you tried to be the expert and you don't know what you're talking about. It's wow, that's radical candor.
No
right
kidding.
But I try to do that myself. I want to know the truth. And sometimes the truth is going to hurt. I mean, sometimes if you're not, it's hard to hear how you're messing things up or how you're not doing things right. But I want to know that stuff so I can get it fixed. And as I'm reading through this section, that's one of the approaches I want to take.
Sure.
Is, well, just keep asking why. And whenever I see a result, ask myself why. What's the system that produced this, and what needs to maybe change in that system?
Right. You ready for action items? Did we really get through the book?
Well, we did. I mean, there's tons more in this work section, but
we got through the peaks of the mountains. None of the valleys.
Yeah, actually, let me, there is one other thing here, putting it all together, the very last section in part 3, I believe. He mentions that we work with others to get 3 things. And I found myself getting emotional when I read this.
Okay.
Number 1, leverage to accomplish our chosen missions in bigger and better ways than we could alone. Number 2, quality relationships that together make a great community. Number 3, money that allows us to buy what we need and want for ourselves and others. And I was getting emotional because I literally, before I read this section, the day before, was talking to somebody at my co-working space about, we walked over and got coffee, and he was asking me, how's work going? And I explained my situation and what I was doing now. And he's like, oh, that sounds pretty awesome. And he's working as a systems analyst for this company remotely. And he's talking about all the junk he's got to put up with on a daily basis. And he makes good money, but he's frustrated with what he's doing. And he gets to work as early as he can so he can get off as early as he can. And the whole time that he's there, he's just agitated and angry. And I recognize that where I am right now, that maybe I don't have all three of these things figured out, but I got the important ones. I feel like what I'm doing now, I'm able to fulfill my chosen missions in bigger and better ways than I could alone. And number two, quality relationships. I feel like Bookworm, Blanc Media, Focused, everything that I'm involved with, I'm blown away with the quality of the people that I get to do stuff with. I could not pick a better group of folks to call my friends. And the money, that's going to come. In the past, I have tried to cram as many things in as I could. I've been guilty of that. And I've recognized over the years that people are the reason for productivity, going back to Chris Bailey. And I just feel like where I'm at right now, I'm kind of in alignment to maximize both of those first two areas. And I know, we've talked about your situation too. I don't want to get into all the details if you don't want to share them, but you're kind of thinking this way too, probably. So I'm curious what kind of reaction you had to this section.
Yeah, no, it's a good one because I know that I've had a lot of rough things come my way in the last year or so, year and a half or so. And some of those I could control, some of those I could not. Some of them have put me in a very difficult financial situation. Some other people have put me in some difficult financial situations. So it becomes a process of, if the people are part of the problem, in that case, I need to get those people out of my life. They are not helpful. They're causing me to think down, and I can't do that. So I guess from a higher level stance, one thing that you and I do a lot, Mike, is productivity tools, systems, services, et cetera, et cetera. We love this stuff, but something I've become more and more aware of, and Ray is it's good timing with this book because Ray is a guy who thinks very, very big, and his systems, the way that he does things, are on a whole nother level, if not multiple levels above what you and I do on a regular basis. People talk about how big success requires big systems and big thinking. It's very easy to focus on, I'm going to put together this OmniFocus course and kick it out, and it'll be great. It'll be a good time. I'll love that process. It's always fun. But Ray would probably never even consider doing something like that because it's not anywhere near big enough for what he's thinking about. Now, the bigger you think, the more finances typically come with it as well. But you have to be willing to alter your systems to a higher level in order to hit those higher levels of success as well. To me, this particular piece that you're talking about is a motivator to do that. Yes, I have been through a lot in the last year and a half. In the last probably week, week and a half, 2 weeks, I've learned of some more difficulties with that, with a mold infection and such. So I'm trying to work through a lot of that, but at the same time, I also know I have been sick for so long that I'm now sick of being sick. And I was talking to my specialist about it, and I was like, you know what, I've been fighting illness for so long that I just kind of expect to feel bad when I get up in the morning, and that doesn't help me heal. That doesn't help me in the process of getting past that.
Sure.
So what I've been coming to lately is, you know what, I'm going to get up and I'm going to be healthy today. As weird as that sounds, is just make that decision. That's kind of where I'm at. Yes, I know that I have some health concerns. I'm not shirking that, but I'm also not going to assume that I'm going to have a bad day because of it. So
I'm going to be super better.
Exactly. And, some of this comes from that. Some of it comes from principles. It comes from a lot of different things, growth mindset, grit. It comes from a lot of these things, these books that we've gone through of you know what? I'm just done. I'm done. And in some cases, as I reevaluate some of this right now and go through it, like I'm in a really good place now. I'm in the process of rebuilding some of what was, in some cases, taken from me and some things that I did incorrectly. Like I'm rebuilding some of that now and trying to do it in a better way. And some of that is primarily because of Principles and Ray Dalio. It's the one action item I have yet from this book is as I'm working through all of this stuff, I know that one of the things I've not done well is systematizing some of my decisions in the business that I run. So I've been shifting it. I've kind of got two businesses of sorts that I'm working through right now, and I want to systemize some of those decisions that I make for those from a numbers stance. I've never really done that. People talk about like sales funnels and such, and it's like I've never been into that, and I think that's a detriment. Like my systematic thinking in all of this is too low of a level to say that it's been truly successful. So I'm trying to raise that bar and take it to that next level of some degree. So this is a long-winded way of saying I like this book.
Yeah, it's a good book. We'll get into style and rating here in a second. You already shared your action items, so I'll share a couple of mine. I mentioned already that I want to create the mindfulness meditation habit using Headspace. Been doing that. Hopefully, I can continue to do that. I also mentioned I want to embrace radical truth and radical transparency however and wherever I can. That one is kind of generic, I know. The other one that is interesting to me, because he talks a lot about the different personality type assessments. He mentions the Myers-Briggs. He didn't mention the Colby. It would be cool to hear, because I really enjoy that one. I think there's a lot of insight to be gained from that one. Strengths Finder, that type of stuff. But I've gone through a bunch of those things, and my wife has gone through several of them as well. I know that there are kids' versions of those types of things, but even if they don't go through those formal assessments, I do think that there is some value in the idea that he mentions of creating baseball cards. He talks about it in the organizational perspective as what people are good at, and they have these things publicly listed. So when you need someone who does something, you look at their baseball card and you can see that they have the skills to do this thing. You shouldn't try to do it yourself. I want to create baseball cards for my family, and I don't think I'll have this done by the next episode. I think this is going to take some time, but I also think that this could provide some identity and some direction for my kids to understand their own unique talents and abilities. Not that they're set in stone, growth mindset, we do hard things, but I do think this would be kind of cool and give them some confidence. So I want to do this for my family.
I think that'll be a cool one. I don't think I'm going to do it, but I think it'd be really cool for you.
All right, style and rating.
Sure. What you got?
I really enjoyed this book. It took me forever to get through it because I created the largest mind map that anyone has ever created, probably. Maybe that's not true. But it was something that I really think is valuable and something that I would like to do at some point in my life. I would love to have a Mike Schmidt's principles like this. I think that this is one of the most valuable books anybody can read. Again, it's his principles, so you have to recognize that. But it is the sum total of his life experience written in a way that he can transfer as much of it as possible to you in as little, even though it's 500 something pages, as little time as possible. I think if you have the right perspective as you're going through this book, there is so much that you could glean from this, and you don't have to try to get it all. So it does take the right perspective going through this book. If you're the type of person who, when you read through a book, you want to keep all of it front of mind, that's not going to happen. That's kind of why I created this ridiculous digital reference. But you don't have to do that either. He even gives you a little cheat sheet section in the middle. The pages, I think, are tipped in red, so you can find it real simply. And he's got a index, basically, of all of the different life and business principles that he outlines in this book. There were a couple things that I heard him talk about, some of the principles, and I was like, I don't think I would do that one that particular way. But that's all just based on values differences, and it really wasn't something that I got hung up on. I struggle with what to rate this because a lot of the 5.0 books that we read, they're kind of life-changing. They give you something that allows you to see things in a totally different way. And this book didn't do that for me, but it did give me a lot more concrete ways to think about things that I kind of understood already. So I feel like this kind of cemented some things for me that he explained it in a way I didn't understand it before. This felt like getting coffee with somebody who was really super successful, and he's just sharing everything that he learned. And if that idea appeals to you, then this is easily a 5-star book. If that sounds boring to you, you're not going to get anything out of this. That's totally right up my alley, though. So I'm going to rate this 5 stars.
Nice. Well, I can tell you that having gone through this a second time, like I reference this book more than I have any other. And like I have a tendency to keep all of my books easily available because I underline and I have my index in the back of them, which is why I don't really have a good way of sharing it with people. So I know that sometimes I'll have something come to mind and I go grab a book from the shelf because I know it came from mindset, but I don't remember what the exact was and I just want to refer to it. So I go flip through the index and I look up the reference of what I was going for and I find what I'm after. I pick up principles more than just about every other book, I'm pretty sure. So this is one that I know will come back over and over and over again. And I already know there's some sections I want to go reference in the midst of doing my action item over the next week or two. Like I know that I'm going to be pulling it back out quite a bit. To me, this is an easy 5.0. Like this is an awesomely written book. Ray does a great job of writing it and is giving you tons of information to share. I've got a handful of potential business ideas as a result of reading this, all of which I should probably say no to. So, like, it's one that can spark a lot and one that I think anyone could glean at least something from. So I do highly recommend this one, but you've got to be, I think you have to be a dedicated reader to do this because it is long.
Yeah.
Like this is a big book. You're not going to sit down and read this on an evening. That will not happen. Mike will make fun of you if you read it for 2-4 weeks at a time. That's okay. But it is one that's worth going through and one that I do really enjoy. So thanks for making me go through it again, Mike.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks to the club for recommending it. I do want to call out real quickly here. Again, you have to have the right perspective. Don't just go by the fact that Joe and I both rated this as 5.0, that this is the right book for you. If you are just trying to get the gist of a book, which I know is what a lot of people do when they listen to Bookworm, then you're not going to like this. This is not something that you can get the Blinkist version of. And there are some books that Blinkist would have been great for that we've covered,
Yep.
right? Because it's a simple thing that should have been a blog post and they stretched it out to 200 pages.
Yeah, like brain
This
chains.
is 540 pages that easily could have been 1,000 plus. If the idea of sitting down with somebody like Ray Dalio and getting coffee and trying to learn from him is appealing to you, then 540 pages will fly by and you're going to wish this was longer. But if you want just like the too long didn't read version, whatever time you're going to invest in this, you're going to feel like is a waste. So make sure that you have the right perspective before you decide to pick this one up and go through it for yourself. Otherwise, it will be kind of a waste of time.
Sure. Absolutely. Well,
Throwing out that disclaimer there.
yeah, it's probably a good one to throw out there. But let's put this one on the shelf. Next time, we are going to go through You Are Awesome by Neil Pasricha. Again, these were advanced copies that were sent to us, and Mike, yours is on the way. But it should be a good read. It's obviously very new. So it'll be a good one to go through.
I was not familiar with Neil, and I went through and kind of looked at all of his back catalog and kind of the stuff that he's written. He's a speaker. I think this is going to be fun.
Yeah, it should be a good
I'm looking
one.
forward to this one too.
What you got next?
All right, I'm looking through the club right now, and one that jumps out to me is highly voted for, Margin by Richard Swenson. This is something that I've wanted to talk to you about for a long time, so
awesome.
I'm going to pick that one. And then Gap Books, I know you don't have one, at least on the outline here.
I don't. Life has been busy.
Yeah. I'm going to pick the same one I had last time because I really do want to dig into Stillness is the Key by Ryan Holiday. If I still can't get to it during this one, maybe I'll pick that for Bookworm 2.
There you go.
I know that this book is going to be awesome, and I've heard lots of great things about it from all the other people who have been raving about it online. So that's my Gap book. That's the plan anyways. All right, so thanks everybody for listening, and thank you specifically to our premium club members. As I mentioned, I've got a ridiculous mind map which is available to club members. If you want to join the club, it's $5 a month. You can also pay in a lump sum for a yearly plan. That helps Joe and I keep doing this, and it gives you access to some extra stuff, including all of the mind maps for all of the books that we cover here. So if you want to download all that stuff, you can join the club by going to club.bookworm.fm/membership, or if you're listening in Overcast, just tap on the little icon on the bottom of the player, which will take you right to that page.
Awesome. Well, look forward to seeing you guys in the club. And if you are reading along with us, pick up You Are Awesome by Neil Pasricha, and we will go through it next time.